All right, so today we're going to be diving into Predictive Oncology, a company making some pretty interesting moves in cancer research. At least that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, they're listed on the NASDAQ, ticker symbol POAI. Definitely worth taking a closer look at, especially if you're interested in biotech and, well, the future of cancer treatment.
For sure. I mean, who isn't interested in that, right?
Right.
So they're kind of at this really fascinating crossroads of oncology and AI and
Yeah, they're using machine learning and they've got this huge biobank of, biological samples, and they're trying, I guess you could say, revolutionize how we find and develop new cancer treatments.
exactly. And that's really what we're going to unpack today. What's their technology all about? What's their business strategy? Where do they fit in the whole competitive landscape? And what are their plans for growth? All that good stuff.
We'll try to break it all down in a way that makes sense, especially for those who might be thinking about predictive oncology from an investment standpoint. Do they have what it takes to actually make a difference and, of course, deliver value?
Yeah, and it's important to remember that, like a lot of companies working on the cutting edge of science, predictive oncology is still kind of in that, early stage where they're figuring out how to turn promising research into actual commercial
Yeah,
success.
exactly. It's a journey, not a destination, as they say.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Like, what's the fundamental problem predictive oncology is trying to solve?
Well, at the heart of it, their mission is to really change the game when it comes to discovering new cancer drugs, to make that process smarter and ultimately more effective. And they're doing this by using AI and machine learning applied to, like I said, a massive collection of biological samples.
So it's like instead of this one-size-fits-all approach to cancer, they're trying to get down to like the very specific characteristics of each individual tumor to really guide treatment.
Exactly. And a big part of their vision is to see a much higher success rate for these new drug candidates, to make sure they actually work when they reach patients. And they're tackling this by taking on a challenge that's been a real pain in oncology for a long time:
Which is,
patient heterogeneity, which basically means that even patients who seem to have the same type of cancer can react completely differently to the same drug.
I see. So like one person might benefit from a certain treatment, but another person with the same cancer, it might not do anything for them.
Exactly. And traditionally, this hasn't been addressed until really late in the drug development process, which is a huge waste of time and money.
Makes sense. So predictive oncology wants to get ahead of that issue early on.
Right. Their CEO, Raymond Vinar, has even said they want to impact the most critical stage of early drug discovery in a way that has never been done before. So they're really aiming to change the game completely.
Wow. Ambitious for sure. So how are they actually doing this? Like what's the technology behind it all?
Well, they've got two main pillars, so to speak.
Okay.
The first is their proprietary biobank, and I'm not talking about just a small collection of samples here. This thing is massive. Over 150,000 tumor specimens from 137 different types of cancer. Plus, they've got 200,000 pathology slides, and get this, 20 years worth of data on how those samples have responded to various drugs.
Okay, that's a lot of data, like a gold mine for researchers.
It is, and that's what makes it so valuable, almost impossible to replicate, actually.
I can imagine like trying to build something like that from scratch now would be like a monumental task.
Right, and they've actually done studies showing that the drug responses from these stored samples are consistent with first samples,
Yeah.
even after being stored for up to 16 years. So this biobank is really a reliable and valuable resource.
So they're not just sitting on this data, they're actually using it to learn and make better predictions.
Exactly. Their SVP of Translational Medicine and Drug Discovery, Dr. Arlette Wieline, said it best. She said it allows them to enable drug developers to query patient responses to their drug candidates, accounting for real-world patient heterogeneity, and to validate targets and biomarkers long before human clinical trials commence.
So in other words, this biobank is helping them de-risk the drug development process, which is, great news for potential investors.
Yeah, it's like having a crystal ball that lets them see into the future of how a drug might perform in different patients.
All right, that's the biobank. What's the other piece of their technology puzzle?
Their AI platform, it's called PETAL, which stands for Patient-Centric Drug Discovery by Active Learning, and this is what analyzes all that data from the biobank.
Okay, and this pedal platform, what does it actually do?
Well, this is the really impressive part. It can predict with 92% accuracy whether a specific tumor sample will respond to a particular drug compound, and that's been scientifically validated.
92%. That's seriously impressive. How do they even achieve that level of accuracy?
It uses these advanced AI and machine learning algorithms to analyze what we call multi-omic data, so that's genomic information, images from those pathology slides, and all those historical drug response profiles. And it does this across a really diverse range of patient samples.
So it's not just looking at one thing, it's like putting together a whole puzzle of different biological information.
Exactly, and this is where it gets really interesting, especially from a financial perspective, because PETAL doesn't have to physically test every single drug-tumor combination in a lab.
Oh, so it saves them a ton of time and money.
Exactly. It only needs to test a small portion of the combinations, and then it can predict with confidence how the others will behave, which is a huge advantage.
I can see that being able to bypass all that lab work must significantly speed up the whole drug discovery process.
It does. In fact, Dr. Hoodline mentioned that they were able to find potential drug candidates for certain tumor types in just 8 weeks by testing only 92 combinations in the lab, and then the AI could predict the results for another 964 combinations.
Wow, 8 weeks, that's incredible compared to, like, how long it traditionally takes.
Yeah, it can save up to 18 months of lab work. And for investors, that translates to faster identification of promising drugs and potentially faster returns.
Definitely a huge advantage in the competitive world of drug development, but let's go back to this patient heterogeneity thing for a second. You mentioned it earlier. Why is it such a big deal in oncology?
Well, it's one of the biggest hurdles in treating cancer effectively, you see. Even if patients are diagnosed with what seems to be the same type of cancer, their tumors can be very different at a molecular level, which means they might respond differently to the same treatment.
So it's not enough to just know the type of cancer. You need to understand the individual tumor's characteristics.
Exactly. And that's where predictive oncology's approach really shines, because they're building that understanding right into their platform from the very beginning.
So they're using PETAL and that huge biobank to predict which patients are most likely to respond to a specific drug even before they start clinical trials.
Right. And this targeted approach can potentially make clinical trials much more efficient and increase the chances of success because they're not wasting time on patients who are unlikely to benefit from the drug.
Right. It's like, why give a drug to someone if you already know it's not going to work for them based on their unique tumor profile?
Exactly. It's about precision and maximizing the chances of finding the right treatment for the right patient.
And I also read something about them using these advanced 3D cell culture models. What are those all about?
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Basically, they're creating these mini tumors in the lab that are much more realistic than traditional models. You know, they capture the complexity of a real tumor much better, which makes them much more useful for drug screening and personalized medicine research.
It's like moving from a flat map to a 3D model of a landscape. You get a much better understanding of the terrain.
Exactly. And they've been working with a company called Taken on this, using their biobank to test these 3D tumor models. And they presented some really promising results at a conference earlier this year.
So that's another area where they're pushing the boundaries of research and, potentially creating even more value.
Right. So they got the technology, but how are they actually doing financially?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. How's their business performing? Because having great technology doesn't always translate into financial success.
True. And their financials are a bit of a mixed bag. You know, they're still in that transition phase where they're investing heavily in research and development. So their recent revenue hasn't been like spectacular.
Oh.
Yeah. In the third quarter of 2024, their revenue was only around $345,000, which is a pretty significant drop compared to the same period last year.
I see. So they're not exactly raking in the cash yet.
Not yet. Their trailing 12-month revenue is also down to about $1.48 million. So there's definitely some work to be done in terms of converting their technological potential into revenue growth.
Right, but didn't they have some decent revenue growth in 2023?
They did, yeah, over 18% growth, reaching almost $1.8 million for the year, but keeping that momentum going has been a challenge.
Okay, and I also remember seeing something about their Streamway system. What was that all about?
Oh, right. That was part of their Skyline Medical subsidiary, basically a medical device for managing fluid waste in hospitals and clinics. It had actually gotten FDA clearance.
Sounds promising. So what happened to it?
Well, they decided to sell off Skyline Medical, including the Streamway system, to a company called D-Royal Industries earlier this year.
Interesting. Why would they do that if it was a successful product?
It was a strategic move. Basically, they wanted to streamline their operations and really focus on their core AI-driven drug discovery business.
Makes sense, especially with this potential merger they've got in the works.
Exactly. Plus, Skyline Medical was already profitable by the end of 2023, so it wasn't like they were getting rid of a failing business. It was more about prioritizing their most innovative and high-growth potential assets.
Okay, so speaking of competition, who else is out there doing similar things in this AI-driven drug discovery space?
Oh, there's a bunch of companies jumping on this bandwagon. It's getting pretty crowded, actually. Yeah, cancer is a huge focus for these AI drug development companies. I think something like 47% of their pipelines are targeting cancer therapies.
Wow, that's a big chunk.
Yeah, some companies like Erasca, Relay Therapeutics, and Turbine AI are focusing entirely on cancer, so there's definitely some stiff competition.
So what makes predictive oncology stand out from this crowd? What's their edge?
Well, first of all, there's that 92% accuracy rate of their pedal platform. That's a really strong selling point if they can keep it up.
For sure, that's a big deal.
And then there's that massive biobank they've got. I mean, over 150,000 tumor samples across 137 cancer types. That's a resource that's hard to beat.
It's like their secret weapon.
Pretty much. And the efficiency of their platform is another big advantage. Remember how they only had to test a small fraction of the drug combinations to get accurate predictions?
Yeah, that definitely saves them time and money compared to traditional methods.
Exactly. And then you've got companies like Lantern Pharma with their RADR platform and a big oncology data set. But a lot of these companies are focusing on very specific, challenging cancer types.
Whereas predictive oncology is casting a wider net with their research.
Right. They're covering a much broader range of cancer types thanks to their biobank, which could be a major strategic advantage in the long run.
And it looks like they're not just going alone, they've formed some strategic partnerships too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those are key, not just for validating their technology, but also for expanding their reach and potentially generating revenue.
Like with who?
Well, back in March 2023, they announced a partnership with Cancer Research Horizons. They're using PETAL to evaluate some preclinical drugs, and there's potential for revenue sharing down the line.
So it's not just a research collaboration, it could actually lead to some financial benefits.
Right, and then they've got this collaboration with UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where their Helomics subsidiary is using their DCHFP AI platform to analyze genomic and drug response data in ovarian cancer patients.
So they're working with both academic institutions and companies like Tecan on those 3D tumor models we talked about earlier.
Exactly, and they've got partnerships with other companies like Fujifilm, Flugen, Surgeontics, even Merck and Company, OCMS, and Redwire Space, so they're really building a strong network.
It's like they're assembling a whole ecosystem around their technology.
Yeah, and these partnerships could lead to all sorts of new opportunities, like co-developing therapies or diagnostic tools, which could really boost their growth.
Now let's talk about this big merger with Renovaro Biosciences. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, it was announced in January of this year. Basically, Renovaro is going to acquire Predictive Oncology in an all-stock deal.
Okay, and what's the goal here?
The idea is to combine Predictive Oncology's expertise in AI-driven drug discovery for solid tumors with Renovaro's strengths in AI, multi-omics data analysis, and all that, so they can create this even more powerful platform for cancer research and development.
So it's like 1 + 1 = 3. They're hoping the combined company will be much stronger than the sum of its parts.
Exactly, and the financial details are interesting. Predictive Oncology shareholders would get preferred stock from Renovaro, which they can redeem for $3 per share after 18 months.
Not bad.
Yeah, and they could even convert those shares into Renovaro common stock if the price hits $4.50 and stays there for a while.
So there's potential upside for predictive oncology shareholders depending on how the merged company performs.
Right, but there are some conditions where Renovaro has to raise at least $15 million, and Predictive Oncology shareholders have to approve the deal.
Makes sense. And what happens if the shareholders don't approve it?
Well, they've got a backup plan. Renovaro gets a 2-year exclusive license to use Predictive Oncology's Biobank and those 3D cell culture models.
So even if the merger falls through, Renovaro still sees a lot of value in predictive oncology's assets.
Definitely, but if the merger does go through, they're expecting some pretty big benefits.
Like what?
Well, they're projecting over 30% in cost savings just from integrating operations. Plus, they'll have access to Renovaro's state-of-the-art lab facilities, which are certified by all the important bodies.
Okay, so that's a big plus in terms of efficiency and credibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're also planning to expand into the European market for diagnostics, introduce some new tests for drug sensitivity and resistance, and really ramp up their collaboration on multi-omics data analysis.
Sounds like they're going for a global presence with this merger.
Yeah, their long-term vision is pretty ambitious. They want to create this whole point-of-care solution for cancer patients that includes everything from diagnostics to personalized therapies.
Wow, that's a big goal.
It is, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're also expanding into biomarker discovery. Remember?
Right, I was going to ask you about that. What's the latest there?
Well, last July, they announced they were going to focus on this area after some really promising results from an ovarian cancer study. Their AI models were actually better at predicting patient survival than traditional methods.
And I remember reading that the market for biomarker discovery is huge.
It is worth over $51 billion in 2024, so it's a smart move for them to leverage their existing resources and AI capabilities to tap into this market.
For sure, it's all about diversification and finding new ways to grow.
Exactly. And their platform is particularly well suited for biomarker discovery because it can analyze specific patient cohorts really effectively.
So they're not just looking for general biomarkers, they're looking for those that are specific to certain types of patients.
Right, which can make a big difference in terms of developing more personalized and effective treatments.
Now, let's circle back to this whole tumor heterogeneity thing one last time. How does their machine learning platform actually deal with that on a technical level?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach. For starters, their AI models are trained on this incredibly diverse data set from their biobank, over 150,000 samples across 137 cancer types.
So the AI is learning from a huge variety of tumor characteristics and patient backgrounds.
Exactly. And then they've got this multi-omic integration where they analyze genomic profiles, pathology images, and drug response data all at the same time to get a really complete picture of each tumor.
So it's not just about the genes or just the physical appearance of the tumor. It's about looking at all these different aspects together.
Right. And that leads to what they call heterogeneity quantification, where their AI can actually identify different subgroups within a tumor type, map drug sensitivity across different genetic variations, and even predict those weird outlier responses.
So it's like they're going beyond the traditional categories of cancer and finding much more precise patient segments.
Exactly. And they also look at how different features impact tumor heterogeneity. Things like using those 3D tumor models, analyzing how drug resistance might develop over time, and looking for shared vulnerabilities across different cancer types.
So they're really considering all the angles, not just the initial state of the tumor.
Right. And then they use these ensemble learning models that weigh different factors, like the tumor's properties, the patient's characteristics, and their treatment history, to come up with a really robust prediction.
It's like having a team of experts working together to make the best possible call.
Yeah, and all this translates into some real operational advantages. They can predict which patients are most likely to respond to a drug, identify potential drug resistance mechanisms, and even optimize combination therapies, all of which can make clinical trials much more successful.
And we know they've done studies showing that they can predict outcomes for a large percentage of drug combinations by testing only a small fraction in the lab.
Right, it's all about efficiency and making the most of the resources while still accounting for the inherent diversity of cancer.
Now, with all this AI making predictions, how do they make sure those predictions are actually accurate and reliable?
Well, they've got a multi-layered approach to that. They're constantly validating their AI against real-world data and clinical outcomes. They use diverse data sets to train their models, and they have really strict quality control measures in place.
So they're not just letting the AI run wild, they're keeping it in check.
Exactly. Their core methodological foundations involve integrating all that multi-omic data from their biobank, and they're using these advanced machine learning models that are constantly being tested and refined.
So it's a continuous learning process for the AI.
Absolutely. And their feature implementation is really important too. They make sure their training data is representative, and they actively try to reduce bias in the data. Plus, they've shown that their AI's predictions match up perfectly with what they see in both fresh and cryopreserved tumor samples.
That's reassuring. And they're using FDA-cleared systems too, so they're definitely taking regulatory compliance seriously.
Yeah, and they've got all these technical safeguards in place, like explainable AI, so they can understand why the AI is making certain predictions, and they're constantly updating the models with new data while keeping track of all the changes.
So it's a transparent and evolving system.
Exactly. And they validate their AI at multiple levels, preclinically with those 3D tumor models, retrospectively with historical clinical data, and prospectively through collaborations like the one with UPMC.
It's a really thorough approach to validation, but let's talk about the data itself. Like, what are they actually feeding into these AI models?
Well, their main source is their own proprietary biobank. All those tumor samples, pathology slides, drug response data, and 3D tumor models.
That's got to be worth its weight in gold, all that real-world clinical data.
It is. And it's what really sets them apart. But they also use public data sets like TCGA, the Cancer Genome Atlas, to validate their findings and make their models more robust.
So they're combining the best of both worlds, their own unique data and publicly available information.
Right. And they also integrate data from their clinical collaborations, like the genomic and drug response data from the UPMC partnership. And they're constantly testing and validating their AI using different approaches.
It's like they're building this really powerful synergy between their own data and the broader scientific knowledge base.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, their competitive advantage really comes down to that unique, curated, and longitudinally tracked data from their biobank. It's a treasure trove of information that no one else has.
So to wrap things up, it sounds like predictive oncology has carved out a pretty unique space in the world of AI-driven cancer drug discovery.
Yeah, they got this powerful combination of a massive biobank and a highly accurate AI platform. And they're really tackling that big challenge of patient heterogeneity head on.
And while they're facing some financial challenges right now, they seem to be making smart strategic moves, like focusing on their core AI business and exploring new growth opportunities like biomarker discovery.
Right, and that potential merger with Renovaro Biosciences could really shake things up and accelerate their progress.
It's definitely a company to watch. Their technology has the potential to make a real difference in the fight against cancer. And for investors, well, it'll be interesting to see how that translates into financial success.
Yeah, it's all about translating those technological advantages into tangible benefits for patients. And that's where the real value lies.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into predictive oncology. Hopefully, you all have a better understanding of what they're all about now.
Yeah, it's a company with a lot of potential, and it'll be fascinating to see what the future holds for them.
If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into companies that are, pushing the boundaries of innovation.
And don't forget to like this video and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future analyses.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
See you next time.